Q Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @QuenReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@quenreview.com. That is INFORMATION @CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
From the National, Friday the 4th of October 2024, from the Politics section. John Swinney's dad refuses to tell him who he votes for. Article written by Alistair Ferguson, multimedia journalist. John Swinney has revealed that despite his father being fascinated by what he does in politics, he has never told him who he votes for. In an interview with BBC Radio 4's Nick Robinson for his Political Thinking show, the First Minister revealed that he has no idea which party his father supports or if he wants Scottish independence. Swinney also confirmed during the interview that he will be running for re-election in the 2026 Holyrood elections, saying he is here for the long haul. Talking about his father and politics, the leader of the SNP said, "He's been absolutely steadfast throughout his life of basically saying to me, I'm not telling you how I'm voting. We talk about politics. He's fascinated by what I'm doing, but it's still a secret. And no matter how much probing I give him, he's just not for telling." When pressed about if he knew his father voted for the party he leads, or if he is in favour of independence, Swinney said, "No idea." During the show, Robinson also asked the First Minister if he still wanted to make space for the new generation of politicians within the party ahead of the next Scottish parliamentary elections. Swinney confirmed that he would be standing in the next Holyrood elections, as he said, "I'm in here for the long haul. There'll be a time at some stage in the future when I step down, but it's not any time soon, and it's certainly not before the 2026 Holyrood elections." Robinson also asked if the Scottish Government is unable to pass its budget through Holyrood, if there would be a snap election. "It depends on the actions of other political parties," Swinney said. "We'll put forward a budget that will be sustainable. We'll engage in a dialogue, because we don't have a parliamentary majority. But that puts as much emphasis on other political parties and what they're prepared to support, because I don't think the public in Scotland want to go to any extra election than they're scheduled to have." When asked if his answer was a particular message to the Scottish Greens, Swinney said, "It's a message to everybody." He added, "There's no hiding place for any political party. If we don't have a budget in place on the 1st of April, hospitals can't get the budget, schools can't get the budget, benefits can't be paid, all sorts of things like that. So all these things follow that will come from a budget that doesn't pass." That article was written by Alistair Ferguson and read to you by Elizabeth. From the National, Friday the 4th of October 2024, from the news section. Lebanon. Israeli strikes cut off key crossing into Syria. Article written by Lucy Jackson, multimedia journalist. Israel has carried out a series of massive airstrikes overnight in southern suburbs of Beirut, and another that cut off the main border crossing between Lebanon and Syria. The new wave of strikes came after Israel warned people to evacuate communities in southern Lebanon that are outside a United Nations declared buffer zone, as a year-long conflict between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah escalates. Israel launched a ground incursion into Lebanon on Tuesday, and its forces have been clashing with Hezbollah militants in a narrow strip along the border. A series of attacks before the incursion killed some of the group's key members, including longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah. The blasts overnight rocked Beirut's southern suburbs, sending huge plumes of smoke and flames into the night sky and shaking buildings miles away in the Lebanese capital. The Israeli military did not immediately comment on what the intended target was, and there was no information immediately available on casualties. Lebanon's state-run national news agency reported that there were more than 10 consecutive airstrikes in the area late on Thursday. The agency also reported that an Israeli airstrike led to the closure of the road near the busy Masnar border crossing, from which tens of thousands of people fleeing war in Lebanon have crossed into Syria over the past 2 weeks. It gave no other details. The airstrike that cut the busiest border crossing between the two countries came a day after Israeli military spokesperson said Lebanon's Hezbollah has been trying to transport military equipment through the crossing. Hezbollah is believed to have received much of its weaponry from Iran via Syria. The group has a presence on both sides of the border, a region where it has been fighting alongside Syrian President Bashar Assad's forces. Dama Post, a pro-government Syrian media outlet, said Israeli warplanes fired 2 missiles, damaging the road between Masna border crossing in Lebanon and the Syrian crossing point of Jadet Yabus. It was the first time this major crossing has been cut off since the beginning of the war. Lebanese General Security recorded 256,614 Syrian citizens and 82,264 Lebanese citizens crossing into Syrian territory between September the 23rd, when Israel launched a heavy bombardment of southern and eastern Lebanon, and September the 30th. There are half a dozen border crossings between the two countries, and most of them remain open. Lebanon's Minister of Public Works said all border crossings between Lebanon and Syria work under the supervision of the state. Israel and Hezbollah have traded fire across Lebanon's southern border almost daily since the day after Hamas's cross-border attack on October the 7th, in which the militants killed 1,200 Israelis and took 250 others hostage. Meanwhile, the Israeli army said it carried out a strike on Thursday in Tulkarem, a militant stronghold in the West Bank, in coordination with the Shin Bet Internal Security Service. The Palestinian Health Ministry said 18 people were killed in an Israeli strike on a refugee camp there. Violence has flared across the Israeli-occupied territory since the Israel-Hamas war erupted in October 2023. Tulkarem and other northern cities have seen some of the worst violence. Israel declared war on Hamas in the Gaza Strip in response to their October the 7th attack. More than 41,000 Palestinians have since been killed in the territory, and just over half the dead have been women and children, according to local health officials. Nearly 2,000 people have been killed in Lebanon in that time, most of them since September the 23rd, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. That article was written by Lucy Jackson and read to you by Elizabeth. From the National, Friday the 4th of October 2024. From the Politics section. SNP win 2 by-elections on Dundee City Council. Article written by Lucy Jackson, multimedia journalist. The SNP have won 2 by-elections for Dundee City Council, with Scottish Labour losing a seat. Lee Mills gained a Lochee seat from Labour, receiving 1,203 votes to beat Scottish Labour's Marty Smith, 1,148 votes. The SNP have held a Strathmartin seat, with Jimmy Black receiving 1,188 votes compared to Richard Macready, who won 911 votes for the Labour and Cooperative Party. It was the Scottish Lib Dems who came closest to beating the SNP in Strathmartin, with Jenny Blaine receiving 912 votes. We told how Scottish Labour have blamed the loss on the winter fuel payment cut and the ongoing row over freebies. SNP councillor Mark Flynn shared a celebratory photo on Twitter X, where he said, "Another welcome, this time to our newest councillor Lee Mills for the SNP here in Dundee." First Minister John Swinney wrote on Twitter X, "Excellent results in Lochee and Strathmartin for Lee Mills and Jimmy Black. The SNP retain control of Dundee Council. Well done to our team." Meanwhile, Dundee Central MP Chris Law was seen celebrating after the SNP gained Lochee from Labour. Commenting, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, "This is a fantastic double win for the SNP and a real vote of confidence from the people of Lochee and Strathmartin. Our incredible candidates, Lee Mills and Jimmy Black, alongside our amazing activists, took the SNP's positive message to voters on doorsteps across Dundee and repeatedly heard about betrayal felt following the first few weeks of a Labour government. Whether it's millions of pounds of levelling up investment or life-saving support for Scottish pensioners, the Labour Party has shown that nothing is off the table when it comes to their austerity plans. Brown continued, their own MPs voted for these policies, as well as the two-child cap. These are Labour Party choices that will harm the most vulnerable Scots, and tonight we saw the consequences of those decisions. They only have themselves to blame. However, voters know the SNP can be trusted to focus on the priorities of the people of Scotland, whether that's eradicating child poverty, supporting our public services, growing our economy, or tackling the climate emergency. We will continue to hold the Labour Party to account for their myriad of broken promises, spreading our positive message on doorsteps across the country and delivering for Scotland. The Lochee by-election was called following the death of Labour councillor Charlie Malone in July. The Strathmartin by-election was called after Dundee City Council leader John Alexander, who was an SNP councillor for 12 years, stepped down in August. Dundee City Council is led by the SNP, with the party now having 17 councillors following the two by-elections. That article was written by Lucy Jackson and read to you by Elizabeth. From the National, Friday the 4th of October 2024. From the news section. Winter fuel payment cut will cost NHS Scotland £85 million a year. Article written by Steph Braun, multimedia political journalist. The winter fuel payment, WFP, will cost the NHS Scotland £85 million over the next 5 years, the SNP have warned. Analysis from campaign group End Fuel Poverty Coalition has suggested making the previously universal benefit means tested will cost the UK NHS £169 million a year due to treating pensioners living in cold and damp conditions. According to Department for Work and Pensions figures, Scotland has 9% of WFP claimants across the UK. The SNP has said that this means the cut will cost Scotland's health service £17 million a year and £85 million over the Parliament. Pensioner couple Peter and Florence Fanning from Coatbridge are looking to take the UK and Scottish governments to court over the decision to cut the payment. The latest figures come amid warnings Scotland's emergency departments will likely fare worse this winter than last. Dr. Fiona Hunter, Vice Chairwoman of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine Scotland, said there is a crisis in emergency care, a description rejected by Health Secretary Neil Gray. The SNP have accused Scottish Labour MPs of shafting their constituents in voting for the cut to the WFP. Seamus Logan, the SNP's health spokesperson, told the Daily Record, "When Labour took an axe to the winter fuel payment, they served up a harsh winter for 880,000 Scottish pensioners. But now we know they've dealt a blow to our NHS too, with new figures showing it could cost our NHS in Scotland up to £85 million. It's shameful that Scottish Labour MPs shafted their constituents by voting for these cuts at Westminster. Scottish winters are infamously harsh, yet they chose to rubber stamp Keir Starmer's cuts and force hard-pressed pensioners to choose between heating and eating. Politics is about priorities, and rather than lining their own pockets with more than £800,000 of freebies and donations, the Labour government should be protecting our NHS and our pensioners this winter. Not only is this a savage blow to older people, it makes no economic sense either." Mariana Mazzucato, a professor in the economics of innovation and public value from University College London, warned last month that Labour's decision to make cuts to the winter fuel payment may not save them money at all, as pensioners could end up hospitalised from being unable to heat their homes. Labour have claimed making the payment means tested will save about £1.3 billion this year and £1.5 billion in subsequent years. But Mazzucato said on Question Time, "If you are actually cutting areas like the winter fuel payment, then that perhaps makes the people who are not receiving their winter fuel, and there's lots of pensioners who will not, get sick, and they end up in hospital, and there's a cost there. And so any sort of modelling or analysis of whether this was the right thing to do to save £1 billion has to be taking a long-run view." Around 900,000 Scots will now miss out on receiving the payment due to it becoming means tested. Most of those who are still eligible for the payment receive pension credit. It comes as average energy bills increased by 10% earlier this week when the price cap went up. This means that people using an average amount of gas and electricity will pay £1,770 a year, adding £149 onto the average household bill. The Scottish Government said it was left with no choice but to replicate the UK Government's cut to the payment due to a funding cut of up to £160 million. Adam Stakura, Policy Director at Age Scotland, said, "There is no doubt that many of the 890,000 pensioners in Scotland who have had their winter fuel payment taken away from them are going to suffer in the coming months. As the weather gets colder, pensioners who are already struggling financially are likely to try to save money by turning down or switching off the heating. This can be disastrous for older people. We know that living in a cold, damp house carries significant health risks, including respiratory illness, heart disease, and circulatory problems. There are around 270,000 pensioners in Scotland living in fuel poverty who will no longer receive the winter fuel payment. We really don't want to see any older person putting their own health at risk in a desperate bid to avoid falling into unmanageable debt." A UK government spokesperson said, "The winter fuel payment is devolved and the Scottish Government has decided to means test it for pensioners in Scotland. We are committed to supporting pensioners, with millions set to see their state pension rise by up to £1,700 this Parliament through our commitment to the triple lock." That article was written by Steph Braun and read to you by Elizabeth.
From the National, Sunday, 6th October 2024. From the news section. Operation Branch Farm cannot go on indefinitely, says defense lawyer. This article has been written by Ross Hunter. The clock is running to prosecute Nicola Sturgeon's husband in connection with the alleged embezzlement of SNP party funds, a defense advocate has said. Peter Morrell, 59, was charged in April by police as part of Operation Branch Farm, a long-running investigation into SNP finances, but prosecutors from the Crown Office have yet to issue information over further action. In Scotland, a police charge is a preliminary step before prosecutors decide whether to take the case to court. Morrell, who was chief executive of the SNP for 23 years, married former First Minister Sturgeon in 2010 and has been arrested twice during the SNP finance investigation. The couple share a home in Uddingston, South Lanarkshire, which was searched by police and forensics officers. Sturgeon was also questioned in June 2023 but was not charged. Scottish criminal defence lawyer Thomas Leonard Ross Casey told Sky News the probe cannot go on indefinitely. He said once somebody is charged, then they have the right to a trial within a reasonable time. Before a person is formally charged, there might be an argument as to whether the clock is efficiently running. There is absolutely no doubt that it is running in relation to Mr. Morrell, so certainly the police and Crown Office have to be alive to that. The police inquiry cannot go on indefinitely. Pro-independence campaigner Sean Clarkin triggered the investigation in 2021 after raising concerns about more than £600,000 raised for a second referendum. Clarkin told Sky News he had received death threats and urged that the probe be finished before the Scottish Parliament elections in 2026. He said, "All these years down the line I have been persecuted by nationalists on social media and at rallies, threatening to do me and threatened to take me out. I have had death threats. This case has to be wound up by the end of this year. In terms of the investigation, for us to have free and fair elections in 2026 without this hanging over any of the pro-independence parties." An SNP spokesperson said, while the police investigation has reportedly been completed and passed over to the Crown Office, the case remains active and it would be inappropriate to comment. A spokesperson for the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service said a standard prosecution report has been received by the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service from Police Scotland in relation to a 59-year-old man, an incident said to have occurred between 2016 and 2023. Connected investigations of two other individuals, a man aged 72 and a 53-year-old woman, remain ongoing. Professional prosecutors from COPFS and independent counsel will review this report. They will make decisions on the next steps without involving the Lord Advocate or Solicitor General. All Scotland's prosecutors operate independently of political influence. Before deciding what action to take, if any, in the public interest, prosecutors will consider if there is enough evidence. There must be evidence from at least two separate sources to establish that a crime was committed and that person under investigation was the perpetrator. This evaluation will involve a thorough examination of the numerous witnesses, statements, and extensive evidence collected by police. Prosecutors may instruct the police to conduct further investigations before taking a decision. Decisions on how to proceed are taken by prosecutors acting independently and are based upon available evidence, legal principles, and the merits of each case. They are not influenced by political events. When making a decision, prosecutors will consider all the specific facts and circumstances of a case. The criteria for decision-making and the range of options available to prosecutors are set out in the publicly available prosecution code. This article has been written by Ross Hunter.
From the National, Tuesday the 8th of October, from the Culture section, exclusive. Scottish Theatre apologises for axing Palestinian show last minute, by Steph Braun. A Scottish theatre has apologised to a pro-Palestine group after it cancelled a show with just 3 days' notice. Eastgate Theatre in Peebles told ticket holders the show Land and Resistance, which was set to platform several Palestinians, had been called off at the last minute because of a serious complaint. In an email seen by the National, theatre bosses say the complaint concerned a prominent individual within the national organisation, but they did not specify any further. The show was being funded and facilitated by the Borders branch of the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, SPSC, which said it was blindsided by the decision. The theatre has now apologised to the group, saying it was wrong to call off the show. SPSC told the National the parties had come to a satisfactory settlement and thanked the local community for supporting them in the dispute. In the original email, Eastgate Theatre said following research it was determined that certain connections and values associated with key individuals involved in the national organisation conflict with our core principles of respect, equality and inclusion. However, the organisation apologised for this, saying they acknowledge that their SPSC solidarity with Palestinians is not in conflict with our values. In a public statement, the theatre said, last week the Eastgate Theatre Board took the difficult decision to cancel the Land and Resistance event. We are sorry that we took the decision to cancel the event. We made this decision in reaction to information that we had available to us at the time, but which we now accept was wrong. We understand the impact this has had in certain communities and groups, and we apologise for the distress and inconvenience caused to the artists, organisers, ticket holders, those members of the public who may have attended the event, and the Eastgate staff team. We also extend this apology to the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and its members, and acknowledge that their solidarity with Palestinians is not in conflict with our values of inclusion, respect and equality. We are committed to supporting diverse voices in our community, and we acknowledge that there are valuable lessons to be learned from the way this situation was handled. The theatre added it is committed to using this experience to inform a review of its policies and procedures to ensure such a situation does not occur again. Several theatre board members have met with members of the SPSC branch over the past weeks as part of this effort. We offer our apologies and wish to emphasise our commitment to growth, transparency and meaningful dialogue moving forward. the theatre added. The show was due to feature the work of photographer Mohammed Zawahara, the poetry of Salsabil El Awazi, and a discussion led by Edinburgh University lecturer Dr. Khalid Al-Ajamar. It was set to finish with a screening of Canadian documentary My Tree. The show still went ahead in a condensed format outside the theatre on the day, bringing attention to attempts to cancel Palestinian voices. Kimberly Davidson of Borders SPSC said, "We were able to reach a satisfactory settlement with the Eastgate Theatre following their apology regarding the cancellation of the Land and Resistance event. We as the Borders branch of the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign will continue to build effective solidarity with Palestinians, including facilitating opportunities for their voices to be heard in Scotland. We appreciate the support we've had from the local community and those across Scotland in the arts sector since the Land and Resistance event was cancelled. We are pleased to be able to return to the important work of campaigning for Palestinian liberation." And the article was written by Steph Braun and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the National, Tuesday the 8th of October, from the Culture section. Stephen Kerr's attack on Scots only exposes his own ignorance, by columnist Wee Ginger Doug. Yet again, Scotland's languages are making the news. Following on from Andrew Marr's factually incorrect and ignorantly dismissive comments about Gaelic, for which he eventually apologised, this time it is Scots which is the object of British nationalist ignorance. The graciousness-free zone which is Tory MSP Stephen Kerr has taken to the Times newspaper to complain that a consultation on the Scots language, written for MSPs as part of supporting documentation for the Scottish Languages Bill currently making its way through Holyrood, has been translated into Scots. Kerr fumed in the Times, "Written Scots really should be left to the pages of Ur Wally and the Bruins and esoteric authors." Leaving aside the fact that the poetry of Scotland's national bard, Robert Burns, is written in Scots, and as such is hardly esoteric, it is telling that Kerr only thinks that the suitable use for written Scots is in the pages of comic books, for all that Ur Wally and the Bruins are Scottish national treasures. His comments reflect the ghettoisation of Scottish languages, which is typical of British nationalism and the cringe. In the case of Gaelic, this ghettoisation demands that the language be confined to the West Highlands and Islands and not be recognised and promoted as a national language for all of Scotland. Even its detractors cannot deny that Gaelic is a full language in its own right, so their demands usually insist on restricting the language to a narrowly defined geographical area where it can safely be ignored. Kerr reflected on this in his comments in the Times, where he stated that he would support any sensible measures to support Gaelic's everyday use in areas where it is traditionally spoken, but presumably not elsewhere, like areas where it once was traditionally spoken but hasn't been for generations, with such areas encompassing almost all of Scotland. The attacks on Scots have a different focus. These attacks typically insist that Scots is not suitable as a written medium for serious topics and deny the unity of the Scots language. Scots is seen as fit for comic use because it's regarded as a fundamentally unserious and trivial language, lacking the dignity of English. This attitude is one of the key foundation stones of the cringe. In many cases, the detractors of Scots deny that Scots is a language in its own right. Kerr did not go that far, but he did deny the unity of the Scots language, saying, "But a Scots language can't easily be defined. It is different for everyone who speaks it depending on where they are from and how they use it. It is a living, breathing and vibrant spoken language. There are many dialects and versions of Scots. There isn't a single Scots language and it's an oral tradition. That's linguistically illiterate. Scots, like all languages, exists as a series of spoken varieties. However, that does not deny the fundamental unity of those linguistic varieties which collectively make up the Scots language. In fact, Scots has linguistic features, in terms of grammar, vocabulary and phonology, which clearly distinguish varieties of Scots from other languages. There is a sharp and well-defined language border between Scots and Northern English dialects, which closely follows the political border between Scotland and England. This linguistic boundary is unique in the English-speaking world. The dialects of Scots are actually not that different from one another, as linguists judge these things, and the differences between them pale into insignificance compared to the differences between dialects of certain other languages, which are universally accepted as single languages, such as Basque, Slovenian, or German. Scots also possesses a huge wealth of written literature, which the late Scottish linguist A.J. Aitken once described as far surpassing, in both quality and quantity, anything else which might be described as an English dialect. This literature is not confined to poetry, although the Scots poetic tradition is especially rich. Scots was the official language of record of the Scottish state and Scottish courts, while Scotland was an independent state. There was, and still is, such a thing as formal literary Scots. There is no such thing as formal literary Geordie or Cockney. What Scots lacks is a universally accepted standard written form, but that is a political and cultural choice, not a linguistic one. People like Kerr are determined to resist any moves for Scots to gain one, because it would allow Scots to come out of the ghetto to which it has been confined by the cringe and by British nationalism in Scotland. Trade union boss warned Labour about union flags at conference. The Labour Party of Keir Starmer, which wraps itself in union flags and sings God Save the King, supports Brexit and promises to be tough on immigration, even it denies that this is a nationalist party, was warned by a leading trade unionist that its newfound obsession with displays of union flags would make the Labour Conference Hall look like Ibrox. Gary Smith, General Secretary of the Labour-backing GMB Union, reportedly made the remarks at a meeting with Labour Together strategist Morgan McSweeney in the Horseshoe Bar in Glasgow, a few days before Labour's conference in 2022. McSweeney, who has just been appointed as Starmer's Chief of Staff, told the gathering that he wanted Labour to be put in the most patriotic show possible and sought to turn the conference hall into a sea of Union Jacks. The comments are reported in a new book by journalist Anushka Asthana, taken as read, How Labour Won Big and the Tories Crashed the Party. Labour challenging Ibrox and Rangers in order to prove it's not nationalist at all. That is infinitely more cringy than using Scots language as a medium for serious writing. In an article written by the Wee Ginger Dug. From the National, Tuesday the 8th of October, from the comment section. As the world remembered October 7, it also continued to look away. A comment piece by Steph Payton. Time is quite the construct for measuring our world. Not only the great healer of all things, it is the means by which we mark and measure the great loves and the various indignities of life apiece. It's one of the reasons I adore Hogmanay. Under ringing bells and with raised glasses, we take a moment to reflect on the year that was, carefully placing it into the past before leaping forward into newness. These cultural markers, anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, are grounded in moments and history, in the minutes of meeting someone new, to the loss of the loved one. Change is the means by which we recognise these moments. Something that was true yesterday is no longer true today. Perhaps that is why Western leaders shared their words of support for Israel on the anniversary of October the 7th, while continuing to look away from the blood and dust-covered bodies of Palestinians. Hamas's incursion into southern Israel 1 year ago was a violent exception to the status quo, branded repeatedly as the single worst terror attack on Israel in its history. In its exceptionalism, it can be marked, measured and remembered. But for Palestinians, there is nothing exceptional about Israel's brutal and violent campaign of ethnic cleansing in the occupied Palestinian territories. October 7 may be marked as a day of exceptional violence perpetrated against Israeli citizens, but for the Palestinians, to suffer such a death toll is no exception at all. There has been a concerted effort by Western media to frame October the 7th as the beginning of something new. And it was. The scale and barbarity of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory has increased significantly an acceleration of the genocidal policies that Israel's victims have lived under for decades. Yet on October the 6th, one day before Hamas took a single hostage, 19-year-old Labid Damadi was shot and killed by Israeli settlers on the West Bank, where Hamas has no foothold. The shooting took place in the Palestinian town of Huwara, south of Nablus city. The town is surrounded by 4 illegal settlements. The army went with the settlers. Between January the 1st and October the 6th, Israel killed hundreds of Palestinians in the West Bank, some in a raid that included the Jenin hospital, bombing the Jenin refugee camp and shooting at journalists. And since October 7 last year, Israel's occupying forces have delivered a campaign of death and torture upon the Palestinian civilian population that eclipses the events of that day 100-fold. Israel's brutal invasion of Lebanon has now claimed more lives on October the 7th twice over. Yet, do we honestly expect that from a year from now, the British Prime Minister will publish a statement in solidarity with the Lebanese people to mark a year of atrocities? No. Instead, Keir Starmer issued a statement of solidarity that, across the 300 words of which it comprised, continues to minimise the lives of all those suffering under the bombs and drone warfare of Benjamin Netanyahu's terrorist state. Most notably, there was one word that remains remarkably missing from his statement: Israel. The state enacting a bloody genocide. The state that has erased countless schools, universities and hospitals. The state that made 2023 the most deadly year for Palestinians even before October 7 is not mentioned at all. Instead, Starmer framed October 7th as an attack against Jewish people perpetrated by those who hate Jewish people. Gone is any acknowledgement of Israel's apartheid and oppression. Gone is any necessary context to understand how things have come to be as they are. Gone is any acknowledgement of the conditions imposed on Palestinians that, as it would anywhere else in the world, has spawned armed resistance. There is more to be read in what the Prime Minister does not say than in what he does. Starmer cites reports of rape, torture and brutality beyond comprehension, some of which have been revealed to have been fabricated, such as the story of 40 beheaded babies, yet has nothing to say of the verified, video evidence of occupying soldiers committing rape, torture and brutality beyond comprehension. Though if I had come out so definitively in support of Israel's alleged right to cut off water and electricity to civilians, as Starmer and many others in his cabinet have done, I suppose I too would be hesitant to outline the true scale of its bloody land grab. With a renewed focus on October 7, it behoves all world leaders and Western press to remember that, as much as we acknowledge that a year has passed since the attack on Israel, we must note too that Palestine's suffering existed before that date, as it has continued to exist every night and day since. October 7 can be marked and measured because it represented a great change for Israel, an attack on the state unlike any other that has come before it. For the Palestinians, however, it might as well be another day ending in Y. And that was a comment piece by Steph Payton. From the National, Tuesday the 8th of October, from the comment section, "We've powered the UK for decades, now we've been slapped in face." By Karen Adam. The UK government announced £21.7 billion in funding for carbon capture projects in England last week. That's great news for them, but another bitter pill to swallow for us here in the northeast of Scotland. Once again, the Acorn project at St Fergus in Aberdeenshire, Scotland's flagship carbon capture and storage (CCS) initiative, has been snubbed. I'm angry, and you should be too. Make no mistake, this is a political choice. The UK fears not only our ambitions but our potential. This isn't the first time the Acorn project has been sidelined. It feels like every time there's a chance to invest in Scotland's future, the UK government manages to look the other way. They'll talk a good game about a just transition and building a greener future, but when push comes to shove, it's England that gets the money and we're left with empty promises. The Acorn project isn't some pipe dream, excuse the pun. It's ready to go. St Fergus has the infrastructure. It's uniquely placed to capture CO2 emissions from the industry across Scotland, and the wider UK, storing them safely beneath the North Sea. This is a project that could create up to 4,700 well-paid, skilled jobs, helping us transition away from oil and gas without leaving workers behind. It's about protecting livelihoods and giving the North East a future in the energy sector. This snub isn't just about missing out on funding, it's about what that funding represents. It's a slap in the face for Scotland's energy sector and for the communities that rely on it. The UK government is happy to take our oil and gas, but when it comes to investing in the future, we're an afterthought. And that's just not good enough. I'm tired of hearing about Westminster's commitment to Scotland when the reality looks like this. The Acorn project would be a game changer for the North East. It would help to decarbonise our industries, keep skilled workers here and create new opportunities for young people who are desperate to stay and build their lives in Scotland. The Scottish Parliament's Net Zero, Energy and Transport Committee has said it clearly. We won't meet our climate goals without carbon capture and storage projects such as Acorn. And this isn't only about Scotland's ambitions. The whole UK benefits when we lead the way in technologies such as CCS. Yet here we are, waiting again while billions flow south. Every delay, every snub costs us jobs, investment and time we don't have. The rest of the UK is charging ahead and we're left holding the bag. This isn't an isolated incident, it's part of a wider pattern. Whether it's energy, infrastructure or economic development, Scotland is constantly being told to wait our turn. But how long are we supposed to wait? The Acorn project is just the latest example of how we're being held back by a system that doesn't work for us. It doesn't matter who sits in government at the UK table. I've had enough of being told to settle for crumbs while Westminster throws cash at projects elsewhere. The North East has powered the UK for decades. Now we're being asked to make the shift to net zero without the backing we need. We are ready to take the lead in this transition, but we need the tools and investment to do it. Let's face it, if Scotland had control over its future, the Acorn project would already be funded and moving forward. We wouldn't be waiting for a UK government that doesn't see Scotland's potential. We'd be putting our people to work, building a greener economy and making sure no one is left behind. This isn't grandstanding or party politics, it's about the simple fact that Westminster doesn't have Scotland's best interests at heart. If it did, we wouldn't be fighting for scraps while other regions are handed billions. We've seen it time and again, Scotland needs to come second. And honestly, it's hard to see how that will ever change as long as we remain tied to decisions made for us rather than by us. We have the talent, infrastructure and ambition. What we don't have is the power to make the decisions that will shape our future. And that's exactly why independence matters now more than ever. I won't stop pushing for the Acorn project. We need it. Our communities need it. Our future depends on it. This isn't just about climate change, it's about economic survival for the North East. We can't afford to let opportunities like this slip through our fingers because the UK government doesn't see us as a priority. Scotland deserves better than this. We deserve the chance to invest in our future, to create good jobs, and to build a sustainable economy that works for all of us, not just for those south of the border. And we deserve a government that will back us. The truth is, we'll never get that with Westminster calling the shots, and this won't be the last time Scotland's future is sacrificed. While independence is a long-term solution, we can and must still take steps now to ensure we don't lose momentum. I will be working closely with the Scottish Government, SSE and other key stakeholders to ramp up pressure on the UK Government. We will be calling for an immediate review of its decision to exclude Acorn from funding and demand that Scotland's needs be given equal consideration. I'll also push for cross-party support in the Scottish Parliament to ensure this issue stays front and centre. Let's see where our Tory and Labour colleagues' loyalty lies, here in Scotland or London. And that was a comment piece by Karen Adam. From the National, Tuesday the 8th of October, from the comment section: why should the BBC licence fee fund a contrived reality show? By Shona Craven. When Big Brother first hit UK screens 24 years ago, one of the current contestants was a tender 11 years old. He says he's been itching to appear on it ever since. Another was just 4 when the first batch of housemates were quarantined amid huge media hoopla. Yet he says he's always been a fan, with a childhood ambition to appear. When some of the current crop insist they aren't looking for fame, I believe them. A mere 825,000 people turned in to watch this year's launch night on Sunday, and the days of Big Brother stars becoming household names are far behind us. The best case scenario is the occasional friendly nod or selfie request from a stranger. The worst is having abhorrent old social media posts dredged up and being evicted in disgrace. The UK might not be producing new reality stars in the same volumes as it once did, but it's still determinedly recycling the old ones. A roster of vaguely familiar faces are still dating, dumping, competing, presenting and even breeding for our entertainment. Add in a few professional entertainers who have fallen from grace, or at least out of favour, and the lineups for I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here create themselves. It's all a bit depressing, but commercial broadcasters have bills to pay, so if the British public are clamouring to watch a controversy dogged Strictly Dancer and a former Tory MP fight over rice and beans, that's what they will be served up. If they want to watch Philip Schofield grow a beard on a desert island and deliver a series of self-pitying and deluded rants, that's also available. But when it comes to the BBC, shouldn't they aim to rise above the grubby demands of the market economy and craft family entertainment shows with genuine artistic merit, featuring skilled and talented individuals and designed to move, wow, and even inspire those watching? The news that the broadcaster has commissioned a fly-on-the-wall reality series starring Stacey Solomon, her husband Joe Swash, and their 6 resident children is perhaps unsurprising, but it's still depressing. Insiders have suggested this will be an Essex answer to Keeping Up with the Kardashians, as if the world was crying out for such a thing. I've written before about the joys of Sort Your Life Out, the BBC decluttering show hosted by Solomon, in which families who have faced major setbacks, including divorce, death and serious illness, are helped to let go of possessions that are often quite literally getting on top of them, and rewarded with modest home makeovers. Solomon is an engaging and empathetic presenter, and the show's messages about consumerism and sustainability are in perfect harmony with the human interest stories. Over time, a few more humans have appeared on the show. In painfully contrived scenes, Solomon, 3rd place on X Factor 2009, Queen of the Jungle 2010, is seen calling up Swash, King of the Jungle 2008, Dancing on Ice Champion 2020, to assist when the time is short to complete a room renovation. In the most recent series, her eldest son popped up to awkwardly help her make a shelf out of a twig for a child's bedroom. Broadcast time that could have been devoted to more interviews with the featured family, or more cleaning, tidying and DIY tips from the expert team, has been spent drip feeding the notion that Solomon and her family are in fact the most interesting characters here. A savvy agent has clearly guided these additions with a view to catapulting the whole family to the next level of BBC stardom. A quick glance at Solomon's Instagram account, which has a staggering 6 million followers, casts some doubt in her commitment to sustainable living, given she hawks everything from homewares to fast fashion and costume jewellery, in between sharing a steady stream of content featuring her youngest children. Commodification of the family itself is the ultimate achievement of a strategic influencer. Not just using the members to build a brand and sell products, but making them, or at least their content, a product too. There are essentially no laws to prevent such content creation, but should any broadcaster, let alone the BBC, be doing it? The tide has already begun to turn against influencers who show their children's faces on social media, both because of potential safety risks and because a child by definition cannot consent to becoming a mini influencer and having some of their most private moments shared with the world and available on the internet forever. In some families, the children themselves have essentially become the breadwinners, with the parents in the roles of manager, camera operator and editor. This new show will, of course, reflect a carefully curated version of reality. Solomon's brand strategy is relatable, not aspirational, despite her personal wealth. But most parents will not be able to relate to the decision to invite broadcast cameras into the family home, and many licensed fee payers will surely question why they're having to pay for it. And that was a comment piece by Shona Craven, and it was read by me, Ian McKenna.
The National News on Wednesday the 9th of October. Ferry disruption is inevitable as a key vessel's repairs are delayed again. An article written by Xander Elliotts. Ferry operator CalMac has warned travellers of an inevitable disruption after announcing that one of its largest vessels will remain out of action until at least mid-November. The Caledonian Isles, which usually serves the Ardros and Brodick route, will have been out of action for the majority of the year, after first going in for repairs in January. CalMac said that the work involved removing all 4 of the ferry's engines. The ferry operator said the delayed repair work meant that they had been forced to extend their temporary deployment plan until the end of the summer timetable period on October the 20th. The continued absence of the Caledonian Isles, which is one of the largest in the fleet, has coincided with the start of this year's annual maintenance schedule for all the ferry operators' vessels, which CalMac said has caused further problems. Duncan Mackison, the operator's interim chief executive officer, warned, "We did anticipate a difficult winter, with our major vessels spending a record number of days in annual maintenance, and it's shaping to be just that. The combination of the Caledonian Isles' ongoing technical issues and the start of this year's maintenance window has created a perfect storm for ferry services." Mr Mackison warned that CalMac will likely have to regularly review where vessels are deployed to try and maintain services across the whole west coast. He went on, "Our priority is to keep communities on the network informed of our plans and to meet service demands wherever we can. However, it's inevitable that there will be some disruption, and on behalf of CalMac, I apologise for that. I know that this will be disappointing news for local people, and many of my colleagues who live and work in these communities share in that disappointment. We're doing everything in our power to provide certainty to people who rely on us to travel, and to add resilience to services wherever possible." CalMac said it will provide an update on future deployment plans by Thursday, the 17th of October. An article written by Xander Elliotts. The National News on Wednesday, the 9th of October. More than 1,000 island residents oppose Tesco opening on Sundays. An article written by Alistair Ferguson. More than 1,000 people have called for Tesco to scrap its proposal to open its Isle of Lewis store on Sundays. The supermarket giant's Stornoway store has remained shut on a Sunday since it opened in 2008 to reflect residents' long-standing tradition of observing the Sabbath day. Tesco had started holding consultations with staff and residents about opening 7 days a week. More than 1,300 people have now signed an online petition against the proposed change. The Outer Hebrides island has a population of about 20,000 people, with many residents members of various Protestant denominations that believe that Sunday should be a day of rest, meaning some shops, including supermarkets, staying closed on Sundays. The practice of observing the Sabbath day is derived from the Bible's fourth commandment, which states, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Some restrictions have been relaxed over recent decades, with the first Sunday commercial flight landing at Stornoway Airport in 2002, and ferries have operated on Sundays since 2009. Many local shops, including the island's only other supermarket, a co-op, remain closed, along with council-run facilities such as swimming pools and soft play areas. The online petition was started by Alistair MacLeod, who says the simple day of rest is at risk due to the concept of 7-day trading creeping into the island's culture. He said, "Many of us hold cherished memories of Island Sundays as a guaranteed day of rest, relaxation and no work, a precious day of family time and worship. However, this simple yet profound day is at risk due to the concept of 7-day trading creeping into our culture." When stores and businesses open their doors on Sunday, it may seem like a convenience at first, but the resulting ripple effect leaves workers with less time to rest, less time for family, less time for church worship, and invariably a lower quality of life. Often we don't realise the value of what we have until it's gone. We are the envy of many people living in mainland Scotland with our peaceful, work-free Sundays, so why swap them for their hectic, stressful, work-filled, busy Sundays? Every year, the Outer Hebrides is voted right at the top of a poll of the happiest places to live in the UK. Is it a coincidence that our islands as a whole are one of the only places that still has a guaranteed traditional Sunday of rest and no work? Mr MacLeod added that he respects the fact that Tesco are a major employer on the island and that they have given back to the local community. But he said that if Tesco opens on Sunday, other businesses in the area will feel the pressure to do the same. Although the island's Tesco is currently closed on Sundays, some staff already work in the store while it's shut at the weekend to replenish shelves. The supermarket said that no staff member would be forced to work on the Sabbath if the plans go ahead. Christian Davis, store director for Tesco in the Highlands and Islands, said, "We are confident that we can carefully balance the demand for a 7-day opening while remaining respectful to local traditions and culture. While shopping on a Sunday is not for everyone, a store that is open 7 days a week would significantly improve the shopping experience for all customers by offering choice to those who do want to shop on a Sunday and reducing congestion during other days of the week, especially on a Saturday." An article written by Alistair Ferguson. The National, Politics, on Wednesday the 9th of October. A private jet tax could raise £250,000 every time Donald Trump visits Scotland. An article written by Lucy Jackson. A private jet tax could raise £250,000 every time former US President Donald Trump visits Scotland, the Scottish Greens have said. The levy would be based on the introduction of a new super rate of air departure tax for private jet passengers, which would be set at 10 times the current top rate of the tax. It comes after it was announced that Mr Trump's new golf course in Aberdeenshire is set to open next summer. Air passenger duty was devolved to Scotland, and in 2017 an act was passed in Holyrood to replace it with a Scottish air departure tax. However, work to replace the tax has not yet begun, with the Scottish Greens laying the blame on the UK government for its refusal to allow lifelined island flights, which are much smaller than commercial planes, to be exempted from the tax. The distance between Scotland and Mr Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida puts it in Band B for air passenger duty, with the top rate of the tax currently set at £581 per passenger. A new super rate, which the Scottish Greens say reflects the increased pollution level of private jets compared to commercial flights, would be set at £5,800. The party said that as Mr Trump's Boeing 757 is capable of carrying 43 passengers, a flight to Scotland would result in a £249,400 fee. Ross Greer, the party's transport spokesperson, said individual efforts to tackle climate change were being undermined by the super-rich flying across the world in private jets. It's time these elites were taxed in line with the massive damage that their lifestyle is doing to the planet, he said. Whether it's Mr Trump jetting between his golf courses, CEOs visiting their yachts, or Rishi Sunak flying between parts of the UK with perfectly good rail lines, there's no justification for it when we can all see the effects of climate breakdown as they devastate communities across the planet. Mr Greer continued, a private jet tax would raise money for our public services, but its real aim would be to keep the super-rich and their destructive toys on the ground. It would of course have the added bonus of keeping the notoriously tight and cash-strapped Donald Trump out of Scotland. That's a gift you couldn't even begin to put a price tag on. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 9th of October. Russian spies are plotting to cause mayhem on the streets of the UK, warns the MI5 chief. An article written by Ross Hunter. The Russian intelligence service is on a sustained mission to generate mayhem on UK streets, the head of MI5 has warned. Ken McCallum said that Russian military intelligence agents have carried out arson, sabotage and more dangerous actions in Britain amid the UK's support for Ukraine in the war between the two nations. Speaking at the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre in West London on Tuesday, Mr McCallum said, "The UK's leading role in supporting Ukraine means that we loom large in the fevered imagination of Russian President Vladimir Putin's regime, and we should expect to see continued acts of aggression here at home." The Russian military intelligence in particular is on a sustained mission to generate mayhem on British and European streets. We've seen arson, sabotage and more dangerous actions conducted with increasing recklessness and having precisely the opposite effect of what the Russian state intends in driving increased operational coordination with partners across Europe and beyond. In the last year, he said that the number of state threat investigations, that is, inquiries into plots by hostile states, had surged by 48%. MI5 has responded to 20 Iran-backed plots since January 2022 that presented potentially lethal threats to British citizens and UK residents. Mr McCallum said that both Russia and Iran have turned to employing criminals and private intelligence officers in the UK to do their work on British soil. He said, "The more eye-catching shift this year has been Russian state actors turning to proxies for their dirty work, including private intelligence operatives and criminals from both the UK and third countries. Like the Russian services, Iranian state actors make extensive use of criminals as proxies, from international drug traffickers to low-level crooks." The expulsion of hundreds of Russian diplomats from across Europe has meant that the intelligence service is more reliant on cyber activities. We should expect further testing and, in places, defeating the West's cyber defences. An article written by Ross Hunter. The National News on Wednesday the 9th of October. Scotland's population rockets thanks to migration from abroad. An article written by Steph Braun. Scotland's population rose faster than at any time since the 1940s for the first half of last year, thanks to people moving to the country from abroad and from elsewhere in the UK. The National Records of Scotland mid-year estimates for 2023 put the country's population at 5,490,100, up 43,100 from the middle of 2022. It's a 0.8% increase on the previous year and the biggest jump in 1 year since 1946 to 1947. The National Records of Scotland has said that the main driver behind the growth was people moving to Scotland from abroad and from other parts of the UK, while there was a fall in the number of people leaving Scotland. Esther Roughsedge, the head of demographic statistics, stressed that the population would have fallen if it hadn't been for migration to Scotland, given that deaths outnumbered births by the highest amount on record. She said almost 2/3 of people moving to Scotland came from outside the UK. We also saw a fall in the number of people leaving Scotland. Without migration into Scotland, the population would have fallen. Deaths outnumbered births by the highest amount on record. There were 19,100 more deaths than there were births. Inward migration fell slightly compared to the previous 12 months, but there was a bigger drop in outward migration. Statistics did show that Scotland's population is getting older. More than a fifth of Scotland's population is 65 and over, with 16% aged 0 to 15 years. This is due to the baby booms of the previous century and the falling birth rate. Data showed that the populations of the larger cities have grown the most between mid-2022 and mid-2023. Edinburgh's population grew by 1.7%, or 8,680 people, while Glasgow's population jumped up by 1.6%, or 9,920 people. In Aberdeen, the population also increased by 1.6%, or 3,500 people. In contrast, the populations of a number of rural and island council areas have fallen in the year to mid-2023. The overall UK population is estimated to have risen by 1% in the year to June 2023, the largest annual percentage increase since comparable data began in 1971, figures suggest. Some 68,265,200 people were likely to have been resident in the UK in the middle of last year, up 662,400 from 12 months earlier. The jump of 1% follows a rise of 0.9% in the year to mid-2022, according to the Office for National Statistics. It means that the UK population is estimated to have increased by 1.28 million in the 2 years to mid-2023. Net international migration was the main contributor to the rise in population for all 4 nations of the UK in the year to mid-2023, the Office for National Statistics said. An article written by Steph Braun. The National Politics on Wednesday the 9th of October. Scottish Government to consult on speed limit changes amid rising road deaths. An article written by James Walker. The Scottish Government is to consult on changing the speed limit for drivers amid concerns about rising road deaths. Transport Secretary Fiona Hislop announced the move as she revealed that road fatalities in 2024 so far are tracking 26% above the same period last year. It comes after statistics from Transport Scotland showed a decrease in road deaths in 2023, down 16 from the previous year to 155. However, last year's figures also revealed a 3% rise in the number of casualties, with these going from 5,630 in 2022 to 5,788 in 2023. Stressing that one death on our roads is one too many, Ms Hislop said a record £36 million is being spent on road safety in 2024-2025. The Scottish Government said the cash will fund national campaigns aimed at encouraging drivers to change their behaviour in a bid to reduce speeding and increase seatbelt use. The government also plans to use technology to detect those driving while using phones and other handheld devices and those not wearing seatbelts. After the 2023 figures showed a rise in deaths amongst pedestrians and cyclists to 47 and 7 respectively, more than £4 million will be used in a bid to reduce casualties amongst these groups. Meanwhile, a £10 million Road Safety Improvement Fund will support work by local councils to reduce casualty rates and risks on roads in their areas. In addition, Ms Hislop said that the government will carry out public consultation to explore views on potential changes to national speed limits on Scotland's roads. Ministers have set the target of achieving 50% reductions in the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads by 2030, and the Transport Secretary stressed that the issue of road safety is a priority. She said, "We remain absolutely committed to working together to reach our ambitious goals. However, despite our best efforts, I'm aware of the challenges we face in meeting casualty reduction targets for 2024, and that the number of fatal casualties for 2024 is tracking 26% above the same period last year. That's why a record £36 million is being invested this financial year to deliver a wide range of initiatives aimed at improving driver behaviour and ultimately reducing the number of casualties on our roads. This includes campaigns to encourage a change in behaviours regarding speeding and seatbelt use, funding to help local authorities enhance road safety performance on local roads, and advancing the use of technology to tackle issues around driver distraction. I want to restate the Scottish Government's unwavering commitment to achieving its goal of making Scotland's roads amongst the safest in the world by 2030. This comprehensive package of measures over the coming financial year is aimed at helping to deliver this." An article written by James Walker. The National News on Wednesday the 9th of October. Subsea tunnels linking Scottish islands is not fantasy, say experts. An article written by Ross Hunter. Experts have said that proposals to build a network of subsea tunnels linking several Scottish islands are not fantasy and could happen relatively soon. A team of consultants appointed by Shetland Islands Council is currently exploring how transport links between the islands could be improved over the next 30 years. Engineering consultancies COWI, Stantec and Mott MacDonald are collaborating on a study weighing up the merits of improved ferry links and fixed links options, such as bridges or subsea tunnels. Speaking to the Scotsman, they said, "This is not fantasy, it's not a theoretical exercise. It's real and tangible, it's happening around the world, and it may well happen relatively soon in Shetland." In reality, whether from an engineering or a financial perspective, there's usually nothing enormously challenging involved. And the benefits of tunnelling reach far beyond simply a faster, more reliable and more environmentally friendly transport link than that provided by an ageing, carbon-intensive ferry. We don't have to look all that far from our shores to see them. The Faroe Islands have been tunnelling for many decades, based on a strategy of ensuring that those in the outer islands can easily access the capital, Tórshavn, and vice versa. It's been an extraordinarily successful programme. The study is part of a £700,000 project which seeks to make the case for funding future transport links in Shetland. Any future tunnels are likely to focus on linking Lerwick, Bressay, Walsay and the main island, and linking the main island to Yell and Yell to Unst. Stephen Canning, Director of Transport Planning at Stantec, added, "For island communities across Shetland, the future of connectivity is a fundamental concern. The ability to access employment, services and leisure opportunities on the Shetland mainland, move high-value goods and facilitate travel to and service delivery in the islands requires a high-quality and resilient inter-island transport network." We're delighted to have been appointed by Shetland Islands Council alongside our long-term partners COWI and Mott MacDonald to deliver the Shetland Inter-Island Connectivity Study. By working closely with island residents and other stakeholders, we will develop a strategy that, through promoting greater connectivity, will support improved well-being, resilience and prosperity. The Liberal Democrat MP for Orkney and Shetland, Alistair Carmichael, described the potential future tunnel network as invaluable. Any study that examines the future transport needs of the Isles, including fixed links, is of course welcome, he said. It's islanders themselves, however, who need to be in the driving seat in the campaign for tunnels in Shetland. We've already seen the benefits brought by bridges to Burra, Trondra and Muckle Row. A tunnel network would be invaluable in supporting local economies and strengthening access to public services such as healthcare. I've seen at first hand how the Faroe Islands are linking up 18 islands and almost 90% of their population, protecting them from bad weather and breakdowns. We need to see much more being done to deliver the political will and investment required to connect our communities long into the future. An article written by Ross Hunter. The National News on Wednesday the 9th of October. Zonal pricing could give Scotland free electricity, Octopus Energy boss says. An exclusive front page article written by Steph Braun. Scotland would have the cheapest energy in Europe and could even have free power at times if zonal pricing was introduced, an Octopus Energy chief has said. Rachel Fletcher, Director for Regulation at the company, told The National that Scots were getting the raw end of the deal in the UK's outdated energy market, which she's insisted could turn into a national scandal in the years to come. She said that if zonal pricing was introduced, which would better reflect the supply and demand balance, Scots could at times benefit from negative energy prices, where you're effectively paid to use electricity or you're getting it free. It comes after the Octopus CEO, Greg Jackson, also said that Scotland could have free electricity at times if Ofgem changed its regulations. At the moment, Britain has one national energy price, even though at any point in the day the cost of producing electricity differs radically around the country. It costs money to move electricity from where it's produced to where it's needed. Under the current market, if an offshore wind farm in Scotland produces more electricity than the network can handle, it's paid to turn off, or it's constrained, and a gas-fired power plant in the south of England is paid to turn on. The constraint costs, which are collected from consumers, are huge, and in 2022-2023 they amounted to £1.5 billion and are projected to rise to £3.7 billion by 2030, something Octopus considers a staggering waste of electricity. Zonal pricing would split the UK up into several different geographical zones, with each having a different price based on its level of supply and demand. Energy consumers would pay less for electricity if they're based close to the electricity projects, but more if they're based further away, meaning that Scotland, with its abundance of renewables, would benefit enormously. Octopus says that this would make the energy system much more efficient, helping to match demand to where energy is plentiful, cheap and green. Asked if Scotland was getting the raw end of the deal, Ms Fletcher told The National, definitely. With zonal, instead of Scottish people getting a raw deal and watching the turbines not turning, knowing that those companies are getting paid for it, we could be attracting new industry into Scotland. Scottish consumers could be having multiple periods of the day and the year when energy prices are potentially negative, where you're paid to use electricity or at least get it free. We're already trying to make it clear to our customers when the wholesale price is low and give them access to free electricity periods. We could be doing that more often if we had proper zonal pricing, where you could see the areas where there is excess wind or solar, and instead of paying for that to turn off, let's encourage people to use it. Ms Fletcher said from having family in Scotland, many of whom live close to wind farms, she understood the sense of outrage people feel over not reaping the benefits of being close to renewable generation. Constraint costs are going up all the time, and I know because I've got a lot of family in Scotland, some of whom live in areas with lots of wind farms. That sense of outrage of not seeing any benefit in terms of lower prices because these wind farms get cut off and are being paid to turn off, she said. Something big has to change. The current system we have got, with constraint costs going up and up, is not sustainable, and paying wind farms to turn off is going to turn into a national scandal. I think the government knows this. Some of the biggest savings for customers from zonal pricing would be in Scotland and the north of England, because a zonal price will reflect the local supply and demand balance. So if you've got excess supply, then there's going to be many points in the day and across the year when the price of electricity is going to be very low, and people in those areas will see that in their bill, as opposed to now, where everybody faces the marginal cost of gas, even if you're in an area that's very rich in renewables. Ms Fletcher explained how analysis has shown that zonal pricing would give everybody in the UK a lower electricity bill. Based on Octopus's own modelling tracking what a zonal price would be versus the current wholesale price, over the last 12 months some areas of the UK would have paid £2 billion less, and that's with no changes to where generators or industry are siting. Earlier this year, former UK Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho set out proposed measures to switch to zonal pricing, but Ms Fletcher said no results from the consultation had been released. With the price cap having gone up by 10% this month, Ms Fletcher said it is becoming more frustrating that the UK is not making the most of the massive opportunity zonal pricing would bring. Britain has got some of the highest, if not the highest, prices in Europe. The analysis that's been done on zonal pricing has shown that Scotland would have the lowest electricity prices in Europe, she said. It's good for all customers because prices will fall everywhere, but it's particularly good for Scottish customers, and it could be good for the Scottish economy. We feel like we're missing a massive opportunity here. While Ms Fletcher said she agreed with having a price cap, which ultimately protects everyone's access to a fair price, she said the way the market currently works still leaves energy providers in a horrid situation. It's why we're so passionate about zonal pricing, because the best way to get the very low cost of green power benefiting people's energy bills is to split up the current wholesale market price so that customers are not paying the very huge cost of constraining off excess wind, she said. We're trying to create a more efficient system in terms of where big new factories and big generators locate. We should be trying to get generators closer to where demand is, and we should be encouraging big electricity users like data centres and hydrogen producers to go to places like Scotland, where we've got too much power for the local grid and where everybody in the country is having to pay to turn off that extra wind. An exclusive front page article written by Steph Braun.
This is from The National on Thursday, 10th October 2024. From the comment section. The SNP can't claim to be climate leaders without any action. By Callum Hodgson. This week, the Scottish Parliament will debate the long-awaited bill to change yearly emissions targets to 5-year carbon budgets. The move comes after the Scottish Government dramatically ditched their 2030 climate targets in April this year. This moment is a marker of failure for an SNP government that triumphantly declared themselves climate leaders just 5 years ago. Despite leading the way on calling out these issues as the emergencies they are, when looking at what the SNP have actually done in office, we find ourselves no further forward on tackling the climate crisis. In fact, this government seems to be moving closer to fossil fuels, not away from them. How have we got here? And what does this mean for Scotland's commitment to climate action? In 2019, the Scottish Parliament targets that genuinely reflected the demands of climate scientists for the deep, rapid emissions cuts needed to avert the worst climate disaster scenarios. Nicola Sturgeon, then leader of the SNP and First Minister, declared a climate emergency and, in the same breath, declared Scotland climate leaders. The only problem was there were no real plans to meet the targets. The targets were supposed to be a monumental shift in priority, resources and action by the Government and Parliament, a response in proportion to the crises we are facing. Instead, dealing with a complete lack of ambition, Scotland found itself falling behind every year. In 2024, the Scottish Government, under Humza Yousaf, failed to hit 9 of their 13 targets to reduce emissions, leading to the dropping of the 2030 targets in April. Under the leadership of Swinney and Forbes, the Scottish Government has gone even further backwards. The SNP has weakened its stance on new fossil fuels, moved away from sustainable transport by hiking train fares, and slashed funding for environmental restoration schemes. Meanwhile, the £4 billion budget for 3 road expansion schemes has remained intact. I, unfortunately, don't find this surprising. As ever, they claim to champion a bold future for Scotland, but really they speak for the status quo. The truth of the matter is this: a new iteration of these targets won't change anything. Whether the SNP focus on 5 yearly budgets or yearly reduction in carbon emissions targets, the Scottish Government has proven itself as completely unserious about the climate crisis. The good publicity they received 5 years ago by calling themselves climate leaders no longer holds. They are ready to move on to the next issue, seemingly with no issue with the fact that they have failed to deliver on their promises. But we need to keep focused on the fact that the multiple crises we are facing today in Scotland are interlinked. And to ensure warm homes, lower energy bills, clean air and a livable future, we need real action from our government and an end to empty targets. If the SNP want to regain credibility on tackling the climate crisis and protecting Scotland's future, They need to be honest about the work needed to be done and be open about the benefits these actions can create. A wealth tax implemented at UK level could see billions of pounds unlocked to invest in green energy. This is already popular across the UK, and the SNP party voted at last month's conference in favour of a wealth tax. A green jobs guarantee ensures that those who want to work in the green economy can do so. Those workers who are currently working in oil and gas should be able to retrain for free and move into future-proof careers that will not disappear as soon as the fossil fuel companies decide that they are no longer profitable. Grangemouth. If we truly revitalise our public transport system by removing peak fares once and for all, we can see increased train use and more money in the pockets of working people. Finally, we should stop selling our natural resources to multinational corporations that will only profit off our energy. The SNP talk about our renewable potential as Scotland's energy. On this, I agree with them. It is Scotland's energy. It is not for the SNPs to sell off for a quick payday. The truth is, these climate targets were brought in not because of the Scottish Government's climate leadership or because the SNP are serious about our future. These targets were the result of countless young people and campaigners demanding action to secure a livable future in which we can thrive. Today is the same. There are campaigns across the country from communities in the northeast to the southwest demanding action on climate, demanding a resetting of the social contract and imagining another path we can take. This path is achievable and it is possible. The SNP just need to join us. If they really speak for Scotland, they would. That article was by Callum Hodgson. Callum Hodgson is the Scotland campaigner for Green New Deal UK.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and to tell your friends about our service.